Now, they were words calculated to challenge and provoke, calling the Chequers proposal a suicide vest and comparing women in burqas to bank robbers. Today, Boris Johnson told Sky News he stood by what he wrote and criticised the confected indignation among those who attacked him. He also claims that Theresa May's preferred plan for Brexit is a great deal for the EU and that Brussels might eventually accept it. The former Foreign Secretary was speaking to our Deputy Political Editor, Beth Rigby.
Gone to ground since his resignation from Theresa May's Brexit cabinet. On the eve of party conference, Boris Johnson is back, pitching his alternative plan for a deal with the EU, the former Foreign Secretary, in his first set of media interviews. He says he's challenging the policy, not the Prime Minister. But is it possible to do one without the other? Boris Johnson, do you want to be Prime Minister?
What I want is to change the current state of the Brexit negotiations away from where they are, which is, I think, mired in confusion.
Asked 4 times in this interview if he wants to be PM, he insists this is all about policy, not personal ambition. No ringing endorsement for Theresa May, but no overt challenge either. Yet. Do you think she should lead the party into the next general election?
That's a matter for her, and she said herself that she'll go on for as long as.
Right,
but let me be. It is so important that people understand that this is about trying to get Brexit back on track, and I think it's about trust and how people see us. So I feel it obviously very personally because I was partly responsible. Yeah.
An admission, then, that his own reputation rests on a successful Brexit. So now, with months to go, a rallying cry to mobilise fellow Leavers against Chequers before it's too late. Must the party chuck her?
No, what needs to happen is there needs to be a change of policy. And
not of leadership?
No, it's not about that. This is about the direction that we're going in. And my anxiety really is that, yes, it's true, formally speaking, that the EU has rejected Chequers. But be careful, because actually it's a great deal for them. And I just want to make, because I don't think people quite get this, the Chequers deal is actually, were it to be agreed with the EU, would be a political triumph for Brussels. Because what it would show is that the United Kingdom, for all its power and might, for all the £2 trillion economy that we have, 5th biggest economy in the world, that in the end, when it came to it, we were unable to reclaim economic and political independence. That's the risk. I think there are some people on my side of the argument who kind of think, oh well, Brussels will never wear it. I think it's a disastrous option, but I fear that Brussels may go for it.
And that is a real fear for Boris Johnson, and a personal one at that. If Chequers does succeed, his version of Brexit will never be delivered. His political future then dead on arrival. Perhaps no surprise he's fighting back, doubling down on what some have dubbed dog whistle remarks. It has become quite heated, though. You described her Brexit plan as a suicide vest wrapped around Britain. Do you regret those words?
I think there is, I'm afraid, in what we're trying to do with the, I'm sorry to revert to it because I know you think it's a technicality, but the December the 8th Irish backstop would effectively give the...
I know, but it's not
can I just explain?
Yeah, I know.
But I explain. I think people need to understand.
It's not great language, though, is it? It's not really prime ministerial language, is it?
That's for others to judge.
Did you feel bad about it? You didn't even feel bad about it.
I felt it was. What I think that the problem with the Irish backstop is very accurately. It's very accurate with the words. I stand by what I said.
You didn't feel bad.
I stand by what I said.
What about burgers? Did you feel bad about that?
I stand by what I say in all these. Beth, if you go back over 25 years of my writing and speaking, you will find I'm trying to say something radically different from what people impute to me. And what I would ask our viewers to do is actually to go and look at the articles concerned.
Some of your colleagues
because sometimes
that
there is an element...
apologise for calling, describing women wearing bugs as bank robbers and letterboxes. You're now under investigation. Will you apologise for that, or do you think that was okay?
As I say, I stand by what I wrote. I urge my friends and colleagues to look carefully at what I wrote, I think you'll find invariably that there is an element of confected indignation about things that I've said that are wrenched out of context. And in this particular context, I think possibly, to just throw this thought out there, Beth, what is going on is that people do feel a slight sense of uneasiness about the direction, more than a slight sense of uneasiness, real alarm about the direction of the Brexit negotiations, and they are conscious that I have a strong view about that, and I think they're perhaps reacting to that as much as to anything else.
Trying to be the statesman today, but there's buckets of political calculation in Mr Johnson's latest Brexit broadside. If Mrs May fails, he's ready and waiting. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In his first interview since resigning as Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson has repeatedly refused to rule out challenging the Prime Minister for the leadership of the Conservative Party. He demanded that Theresa May ditch her current Brexit plan and said he would fight for his alternative vision. A government source said Mr Johnson's plan offers no answers. Laura Kuhnsberg reports.
He's out of government, but still wants to get his way.
The problem with Chequers is that it doesn't take back control, it relinquishes control, it forfeits control.
Why do you think the Super Canada deal, as you describe it, is doable, even if it's desirable?
Well, it's what all great countries want to do with the EU. They want to have a big free trade deal. We were on the right path. And then, as you know, we had the election, the Irish issue gained in salience, I think, perhaps not quite deservedly. And we've been a bit blown off course.
That idea of a Canada arrangement, a looser style deal with the EU, is not going to be accepted by that side without a rock-solid guarantee about the Irish border.
Well,
now, you signed up to that in December when you were in Foreign Secretary, and now you're saying, oh, that shouldn't be operable anymore, it's not acceptable.
I stayed in Cabinet for as long as I could persuade myself that there was still a chance that we would go the right way and we would stick with the original vision that the Prime Minister had.
But if this is such a good idea and it is viable, why does the British government have no intention of following this course? Why does nobody in the EU say that this is doable without significant movement on Ireland?
If you stick with Chequers, I think what will happen is that the electorate of this country will look at what we in the end have produced, and they will say, how on earth was that the outcome of voting to leave? It will do lasting damage to the credibility of this country around the world. People will say, you know, the UK is a great power, a great economy. Why are they so passive and so supine?
Downing Street sources says his ideas just aren't workable. But for Brexit's biggest cheerleader, it's not just about how we exit the EU, but also what might one day see him into number 10.
What are you willing to do to stop a deal based on the Chequers proposals going ahead?
My duty now is to make the case for freedom.
What many of your colleagues will see here, and what many of our viewers may see here, is that what you are doing is stirring up trouble for Theresa May on the eve of her party conference. You're putting forward the same arguments you've put forward for some time now, and you're just throwing rocks. And what this is really about is your own ambition.
I do care very deeply about this question. I think that unless we change tack now, we will make a mistake that will be very hard to unpick. You know, this argument that it's not the end of the world if we agree to Chequers now and then sort it out later. That is complete pie in the sky.
But the suspicion amongst many of your colleagues, many people in Parliament and many people in the country is you're doing this because you think you would do a better job in number 10. Now, you could end that speculation here and now.
I'm doing this because, and I resigned from the Cabinet because I could not see how I could support an arrangement that I don't think is in this country's economic or political interest.
Do you rule out challenging her?
My job is to speak up for what I believe in and the vision that I've set out today, and I believe in it very, very sincerely. And you know, I'm going to keep going for as long as it takes.
People hear there, though, you not ruling out challenging her if she doesn't change.
I think the Prime Minister will go. As she said to us herself, and as she said to the country, she's a remarkable person. She will go on for as long as she feels it necessary.
Always controversial, rarely quiet. This isn't just about what happens now for Mr Johnson, but what happens next. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News.
Now, with just 2 days to go until the Conservative Party conference, it was pretty predictable that there would be some political hand grenades thrown the PM's way from her former Foreign Secretary. Boris Johnson used his newspaper column to describe Theresa May's Brexit strategy as potentially disastrous for the UK. He says he has a different one. So how would his work where the PM's wouldn't?
The former Foreign Secretary making his last push to persuade the Prime Minister to ditch her Chequers Brexit plan for what he calls a super Canada free trade agreement.
I've been invited to do one fringe meeting and I'm going to do that.
Just ahead of the most important Tory conference for years.
The Chequers proposals would be absolutely disastrous for this country. They mean that the UK becomes, as people say, a vassal state. We're a colony. We are the first country in the history of this continent actually to accept foreign rule from Brussels, but have no one representing us around the table.
Is a no-deal Brexit better or worse than Chequers?
A no-deal solution, or a WTO solution, although it's not one I seek, but that solution, even if it were to mean a temporary hiccup, that solution would be better.
If you were confronted with Chequers versus staying in the EU, which of those is worse?
Well, that's a very moot point.
If you talk to international manufacturers based in the UK, they say they would be very significantly damaged.
Well, I disagree with that. And
why?
The evidence is very clear.
From where?
Across the world, where you have just-in-time supply, across Southeast Asia, for instance, and indeed in this own continent, in our own continent,
which is all based on membership of the single market.
No, they're not.
It is.
Well, then they're not. With great respect, Robert, they're not.
Okay, give me an example.
I went to
somewhere on this continent that is not in the EU and not part of the single market, which is benefiting from just-in-time manufacturing.
Switzerland.
Switzerland is effectively in the single market. You know that by the multiplicity.
No, Switzerland.
It is effectively in the single market. You know that it is.
There are plenty of.
Boris.
Let me give you an example. There is, if you look at the. You asked for on this continent. I'll give you an example. Not on this continent. It is already the case that components move just as fluidly from Singapore into Dahlewitz in Berlin, across to Derby or wherever Rolls-Royce assembles them, and then back again. It is completely fluid.
You're right, because the bit that matters in this bit is the bit between Germany and the UK,
it's not true.
Which you just used as an example.
I don't know why you're continuing to treat this as a matter of hilarity.
It's not hilarity. It's worrying.
It's not. The motor manufacturing industry, that is now saying that their just-in-time supply chains couldn't cope. I don't believe that to be true.
It's all about honouring the promises he made in that referendum.
I did play a role in the Leave campaign. I do feel a deep sense of responsibility to try to make sure that people get what they actually voted for.
But to paraphrase him, precisely what they voted for is, well, moot. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Well, if support for the PM was clearly lacking from Boris Johnson, there was clear backing for her tonight from one of her predecessors. Sir John Major said Brexit-supporting MPs had gone too far in their criticism of Mrs May and it had to stop. He's well known for being no fan of the former Foreign Secretary, even though that puts him at odds with many grassroots party members.
Why we will never... excuse me.
If last year's conference will be remembered for that tickly cough.
And we...
Well, this year, the Prime Minister faces another irritation. Boris Johnson was among those applauding that speech, but next week he threatens to draw an audience of his own. From present to past Prime Ministers, Brexiters have a habit of trying to bring down their own. Tonight, Sir John Major didn't name names, but warned the sniping has become worse than he'd ever known.
When you see the daily taunts and dishonesties that are levelled at her, when you see the inability of those who level those taunts to actually come up with any coherent plan of any sort themselves, when you see the threats that come in her direction of a leadership election unless she delivers a certain sort of Brexit. I think that goes far beyond anything that I would think was remotely acceptable. It is, to all intents and purposes, a party within a party.
So in Birmingham, they're preparing for one party conference, but it may feel like several, with Boris Johnson rivalling the main event here. We all know where Boris Johnson would really like to be. He still hasn't ruled out a bid for number 10. And on Tuesday, he'll get a rehearsal, making a speech on the edge of Conservative conference the day before the Prime Minister makes hers. Both will be speaking to Tory heartlands like North Yorkshire, where there's competition over who's offering the cleanest Brexit.
Correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think Theresa May basically is a Remainer. You know, she's not really going to fight the cause, is she?
I think she's, standing her ground, and I would trust her to do it, rather than Boris Johnson.
I think he's standing by what he's always said, whereas May seems to turn with the tide.
Some didn't expect Theresa May to cough and splutter her way through another year. But if the Prime Minister's going to silence her critics, well, this week she really needs to find her voice. Paul Brand, News at 10.